Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third lecture of the second KIMS lecture series. The title of tonight's lecture is The Muslim Rule in Bengal from 1204 to 1757, focusing on the Sultanate and Mughal periods. The aim of the lecture series are to give a comprehensive understanding of both Muslim rules and British colonial era in Bengal. As you know, we are committed to commencing 5 series of lectures, and the current series is the second one. We hope by the end of this series, we'll have a comprehensive and well-rounded understanding of the current crisis in the Muslim communities. Our lecturer tonight is Muhammad Mojlum Khan. Brother Mojlum Khan is an award-winning British writer, literary critic, and research scholar. He has published more than 200 essays and articles worldwide, and his writings have been translated into several languages. He is the author of several internationally acclaimed books, including The Muslim 100, The Lives, Thoughts, and Achievements of the Most Influential Muslims in History, published in 2008 and 2021. The Muslim Heritage of Bengal, published in 2013. The Great Muslims of the West, Making of Western Islam, published on 2017. And Muslims in British India, The Life and Times of Nawab Abdul Latif, CIE, which is forthcoming. He is a fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland. He is also the member of the Royal Historical Society and founding director of the Bengal Muslim Research Institute, UK. So the lecture will last roughly around 45 to 60 minutes, and then it will be followed by question answer and comments, which will last around 30 to 45 minutes. Now, I would like to ask our audience to keep notes on the lecture. And if there is any comments, could you please make notes on that as well, so that when we'll come to the question answer session or comment session, we will solely focus on the topic discussed. Without further ado, I would like to ask Brother Mojlum Khan to deliver his lecture. Brother Mojlum Khan, over to you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum to everyone and good evening. Thank you for the invitation, particularly to Dr. Akbar for inviting me to, and then yourself, of course, afterwards for chasing up and saying if I would be willing to do this. I approached this rather reluctantly. And the reason I say reluctantly is because my first book on the Bengal subject, The Muslim Heritage of Bengal, which is this book here, is predominantly covers 18th and 19th century Bengal. Majority of the entries are 18th, 19th century figures. And then the current book I'm completing, which is the very first biography of Nawab Abdul Latif, a comprehensive biography of Nawab Abdul Latif written for the first time, covers most of the 19th century. So then to talk about a Sultanate and Mughal period covering more than half a millennium of history. I haven't written a book on that subject, and some of you know me very well. Kamrul Bhai knows me, Dr. Akhtar knows me, and others may know me. So the reality is, here you've got somebody approaching this topic with you, with no claims to expertise in the Sultanate or Mughal period. Having said that, even if I was an expert in this field, to cover more than half a millennium of history within 40 minutes to an hour, it was a monumental task for anybody, if not mission impossible. But I will try my best, because easy option is to say, look, I can't do it. And I never like taking the easy option. But before we go through these slides, which I'm sure you have shared with your colleagues, I want to say 3 very short points by way of preface, if that's okay. Now, why study the Muslim history and culture of Bengal? For somebody like me, brought up and educated here, from infant school all the way to postgraduate degree. Why bother with Bengal? And some of you may be asking this question, and it's important not to uh, for me to say a couple of words on this, because it ultimately, when it comes, this is about making a sense of oneself, as far as I'm concerned. Um, like all of you, I've got multiple identities in terms of being British, a Westerner, a Muslim, Bengali, and so Muslim Heritage of Bengal book was a quest for meaning for myself, essentially. But at the same time, it was my way of sharing this information with the younger generation, particularly those in the Western world who are from Bengal heritage or Bengali heritage or Bangladeshi heritage, but did not always have access to that information. So I wanted to share that with them. But before the Muslim heritage of Bengal, as you mentioned, I wrote the Muslim 100, which was explored Islamic history through the lives of 100 most influential Muslims. And again, in this book, there are personalities from all different range of backgrounds. And there is a reason why, because I, when you study Islamic history or Muslim history, there is a tendency for looking at things from a theological or looking at things from a sectarian or particular ethnic background. And in the Muslim 100, I try to transcend that. So you got some all kinds of strange personalities sitting next to each other, which please a lot of people and displease a lot of people. That's okay. I can live with that. But it is very important. All of these individuals, whether we agree with them or we don't agree with them, they were part of the Muslim history of last 14 centuries, 15 centuries of Muslim history. We can't deny that. And the same goes for the Muslim history of Bengal. In the Muslim heritage of Bengal, I've got 42 personalities, a very strange characters sitting next to each other. Haji Shariatullah and Karamat Ali Jaunpuri only met once, two men, and they never got on with each other. But we need to understand that both of these personalities were part of the Muslim heritage of Bengal. So it was trying to transcend this sectarianization, the theological interpretation and of Muslim history. I wanted to transcend this. And the same approach I took to the great Muslims of the West. 50 personalities in that book in detail, and the other 25 personality in briefly mentioned. Same effort to transcend what we mean by, what does it mean to be a Muslim, to belong to the Muslim Ummah. I say, look, it's very diverse. Cultures, language, literature, a whole range of ethnic background, languages we speak. Yet we are part of this large Ummah, and we need to be open-minded and understanding to accept this, that there is a huge diversity that characterizes this Ummah. And to pigeonhole either any particular group or anybody else into this group or that group means we only create more problems rather than solving them. My other point is I wanted to fill a gap, because I don't like writing books when somebody else has written something on it. So my all 3 books that's been published, fourth one sitting on my laptop, needs to be edited and published, and the 5th one I'm completing at the moment. These are filling gaps in areas I feel that there are no books on those topics. So this is very, very important for me to fill gaps rather than just write for the sake of writing. And my final point, by way of preface, is past, present, and future are interlinked, are interconnected. It is very difficult to understand the present without understanding of the past. And it's very difficult to carve out a bright future if you do not know what your past was and what your present is and where you want to go in the future. So it is very important to understand the past, to enlighten us in our present, and to understand our existential condition, where we are, how did we get here, and then decide where can we go from where we are now, which is carve out a future that hopefully is bright. So there is a connection here. So these are the three things that actually drives me as a student of history to do what I do in my very humble capacity. So with that said, I'm going to now move on to and go through these slides. I'm mindful there is a lot of information to cover, and we need to set aside some time for questions and discussions. Uh, so here we go with the slides. If my my computer works, my laptop works. Yes, yes, it has. Now look, if you are covering two major periods in Muslim history of Bengal, that is the Sultanate and Mughal period, and as I said before, combined both periods, that's more than 300 and more than 550 years of history. That, that's a huge um, a time span. And but that requires initially a good understanding of the sources. How do we know about this period? Um, and where do we go to find out about them? So really, some of the things we need to be consulting, and I will be deliberately focusing in this presentation more on sources, because I think if we do not know where the information is, it's very difficult to dig it out. So it's easy to sit here for me normally and give a chronological account of the various phases in Sultanate and Mughal period. I will do that, but I won't dwell on it too much. I want to focus more on the sources, so that will enable if any of you who are listening, or anybody else that wants to study this area in detail, they can go ahead and do so. Now, that means looking at the early sources, as well as modern sources, epigraphy and coins, travel accounts, oral tradition, and official records. What do I mean by that? Well, the early sources, if we look at the Sultanate period in particular, most of the primary sources, they are Delhi-centric, Delhi orientated. Uh, on the other hand, there are some secondary sources that provide very important information about this period. They are very, very good modern sources, both Muslim, written by Muslim historians and non-Muslim historians, but particularly for the Sultanate period, the epigraphy and the coins are fundamental, most of which are the sultans of Bengal, when they built a mosque or a madrasa or a mausoleum or something similar, they would inscribe a note on it, either in Arabic, in some cases in Farsi. Some of the coins they minted during their rule had these inscriptions as well, and discovering those and deciphering those has enabled historians to reconstruct um, a lot of the early part of the Sultanate period. So these are very, very important sources. Travel accounts. I'll come back to these a, a, as I go along throughout this presentation. Oral tradition and official records. Now, when I'm talking about primary sources, what do we mean? Now, with regard to the Sultanate period, I'm referring to a number of books here that are very important to for, for the purpose of understanding how the Sultanate rule started, how it expanded, consolidated, and how it declined and eventually overtaken by the Mughals. And then another chapter started in the Muslim history of Bengal. So That means looking at some of the early historian and their works. And in particular, I am here, want to highlight the Tabakatanasari of Minhaj Siraj. This is important for two reasons. Because he lived in Gaur in Bengal, the early capital of the Sultans of Bengal, for 2 years, from 1242 to 1244. And he undertook research, collected information to write his history, which is Tabakatanasari, which was dedicated to Nasiruddin Mahmud, the 8th Sultan of the Mamluk dynasty based in Delhi. And it is, he covers, the reason I'm highlighting this is, he covers in this book the first, if you like, the first 60 years of the Sultanate period in Bengal. So beginning with, if you like, Muhammad Bhaktir Khalji, and continuing all the way to 1260. This is a key source for this period. But there were many others. You've got Amir Khasre, he wrote Kirane Sadain, which is the meeting of the two stars, focusing on the meeting of Sultan Bogra and his son Taikobad. Very interesting. It's a Musnavi. It's a Musnavi format writing, but it's important because the author visited, Amir Khasre visited Bengal twice. So his account is an eyewitness account to some extent. And this is very important. But there is also Tariq-e-Firoz Shah. There's two tariqs here, one by Barrani, Jawuddin Barrani, and the other one by Shams Siraj Afif. Now, both of these historians again write from Delhi. The Delhi, what I call the Delhi-centric history, without having visited Bengal at all. Which is why when you read their writings, you see they have their concept or their understanding of Delhi is very distant. Unlike when you read Tabakatanasari, you know this is somebody who actually visited this place and giving to some extent based on primary sources and his account of what was happening in Bengal, certainly during the formative period. That is why Barrani refers to Bengal as what he calls Balgha Khana. What that means is a house of strife. But he forgets the fact that Humayun loved Bengal, and he used to refer to it as Jannatabad, a paradise. So you can see in the writings of these historians that there is, to them, Bengal is far off, distant. It's not a very nice place. And when I say it's not a nice place, because Barrani and Afif and others refer to Bengal by another phrase, which is called what they call Dozoke Purnimat. They say a hell full of good things. Why a hell? Because it's totally unpredictable. The place is strife all the time, rebellion, this, that. They didn't like the climate either. On the other hand, it is full of lot of good things. And I'll come to these good things later on, if I may say so. So Firoz Shahis are very good sources. But as I said before, these are Delhi-centric works. Unfortunately, we do not have historical works. Well, at least known to us, we do not have historical works that were written in Bengal during the early period. I mean, people of Bengal, natives writing about that period. There isn't any, unless you call a Tariq Dawoodi a native work, which was written during the Afghan period, towards the latter part of the Sultanate rule in Bengal. This was an Afghan official, a Pathan from Afghanistan. These guys were serving, they were ruling Bengal at that time. And he happened to write about the Afghans in Bengal. But the other sources I want to touch upon is, when I say secondary sources, I want travel accounts. So for example, the Chinese Ming Emperor sent missions to Bengal in 1406, from 1406 to 1415. And these accounts exist. That's a you can say primary source, and at another level, secondary source. So these are very interesting. There is about 7 to 8 different accounts of these that exist, which gives you a flavor of what the Sultan was like at that time, what his court was like, how these ambassadors were received and they were treated. Very enlightening. My final point on this, in terms of early sources, would be European travelers, Portuguese, Italian, and other travelers who visited Bengal during the 16th and 17th centuries. Very interesting accounts by Barbosa, Frederick, and Fitch, and others, which again sheds light on the Muslim rulers of the time in Bengal. Now, in terms of modern sources, look, there is. I'll wait for next slide for this, because I've touched upon that pretty much in those slides. Epigraphy and coins. Let me add one word here. These epigraphies and coins, although these were minted and inscribed by the Muslim Sultanate rulers, these were actually discovered, most of them were discovered during the early British period, during the 18th and 19th centuries. And I'll come back to that bit later, if during the discussion session, if anybody asks me, because Henry Blochman, or Henrik Blochman, he was the principal of Kolkata Madrasa, a Jewish European Orientalist. He was one of the first ones to actually decipher some of these coins, and contributed 3 essays in the Asiatic Society of Bengal Journal, which is very, very important 3 essays in terms of using coins and epigraphy to reconstruct a significant part, particularly the Ilyas Shahi rule, that period. Sultan Ilyas Shahi Bengal, that period, he actually based on coins and epigraphy, chronologically reconstructed that whole period. And this is very, very important. And I'll touch upon that later if I get a chance. Travel accounts. Well, you see, there are other travel accounts I haven't mentioned, secondary ones. Things like early Arab travelers, Mas'udi. You've got Ibn Battuta. You can say that's parts of his travel accounts, particularly to do with subcontinent and in Bengal, are primary sources. And I'll explain that, why that's important again as we go along. Oral tradition, this is very important. Often it's dismissed, thinking, you know, this is all unverifiable and therefore not worth. I'm not sure. I think it's very important we do not dismiss this out of hand. The reason I give you, as I'm completing at the moment and in the final stages of writing a huge biography on Nawab Abdul Latif, I had researchers go to Rajapur in Faridpur, and I'm giving you an example to illustrate why this is important, which is where Nawab Abdul Latif was born, in Rajapur in Faridpur. And I had this researcher go and interview people in Rajapur. And some of the stories through oral communication that has been passed through his descendants has shed so much light, and that I have not been able to find in printed format, in books, unpublished documents, or in any other sources. So very important that we do not dismiss these oral tradition that exist in whether in rural Chittagong or Sylhet or Faridpur or Rajshahi, any whether to do during the Mughal period or Sultanate period or in terms of Muslim history of this period, this part of Asia, without consulting this oral tradition. Very, very important. Final point I will make on these sources is the official records. The reason why these official records are important: when the British government carried out in 1872 the first census in Bengal, for the first time it came to light to the British rulers, and they weren't aware of this before the census, that a significant population of some parts of eastern Bengal, which is today Bangladesh, or well, at least parts of what we call the country Bangladesh, because Assam at that time also formed part of that eastern Bengal at that time. They were shocked. In some cases, 60, 70, 80, 90% Muslims. They didn't think those areas were overwhelmingly Muslims. The 1872 census brought this out for the first time, and which meant, and I'm dealing with this in the biography of Nawab Abdul Latif at the moment, they had to realign their policies on education, a whole range of other issues when this came to light. And Abdul Latif was directly responsible for undertaking some of these census. But that's another a different a topic altogether. But I'm giving this as an example to show that these official documents are very, very important also, not only during the British period, but also during the Mughal period and Sultanate period, and the things that were happening then. But mindful of time, and we'll move on, some of the essential sources that we should be consulting when we study Sultanate period and Mughal period. These are some of my suggestions. This is not exhaustive. Some suggestions. I've mentioned Tabakatanasari, originally written in Farsi, but it's also available in English translation. So you should be able to get hold of a copy and read it. The other one is Ghulam Hussain Salim, also known as Zaidpuri. Now he was a British official, a munshi in the service of the British, a George Udney, and he wrote Riyazus Salatain, which means it's a Persian work, a summary of Muslim history of Bengal, known as the Gardens of the Kings. Very interesting. It's a modern work, but it summarizes and consolidates a lot of the earlier works. From that point of view, it's very valuable. And Ghulam Hussain uses some of the sources that are not available anymore. So that's why, again, this was translated by Abdul Salim, Maulavi Abdul Salim, into English. So that's available readily, archive.org. Download it and you can read it. Very interesting. The chronology and some of the facts are questionable, but that's fine. Writing history means you're going to have these problems. Then you've got, in terms of understanding the chronology and how it was actually constructed. One of the early works was K.N. Bhattasali, called Coins and Chronology of the Early Independent Sultans of Bengal. But that has been superseded by Maulavi Shamsuddin Ahmed's Inscriptions of Bengal, which was published in 1860. But I would say, and having consulted this, and I have got a copy at home, which I've gone through, late Professor Abdul Karim Rahimahullah, his Corpus of the Arabic and Persian Inscriptions of Bengal, a hefty volume, published in 1992. Again, I've got a copy and I've gone through it. He brings the whole lot together. He brings here Blushman, Bhaktir Sali, Ahmed, Shamsuddin Ahmed, that is. He brings together many others and consolidates and fills other gaps in terms of and fills it is when he had discovered some of the new coins and other things himself. These some of them were in Rajshahi, Varendra Museum, and many other places. He includes those additional new coins and so on. So really, instead of going round in circles, I would say to you, if you want to read one very good book on understanding the Muslim history and heritage of Bengal, but do it through coins and chronology and epigraphy, you can't do better than go for Abdul Karim. Whatever has happened since, in a big way, on this subject has been done by Professor Yaqub Ali, and I have got some of his contribution on this subject. He's built upon, he regards Abdul Karim as his teacher, because Abdul Karim was one of his one of his teachers when Abdul Karim was posted at Rajshahi. And Yaqub Ali confirms to me that he has since managed to find new coins and deciphered them and fills gaps left in Abdul Karim's work. And I have got that copy of Yaqub Ali's book as well. So we're very much up to date. Unless obviously over the last 15 years somebody else has discovered new items. Now the other quick sources I want to mention quickly is Professor Abdul Karim's Banglar Itihash Sultani Amol and Banglar Itihash Mughal Amol. Both of them are very valuable works, but to be honest with you, in both of these works he doesn't do anything outstanding. It's historically chronological survey of both periods. But what he does do outstanding is his history of Bengal, Mughal period. He wanted to write 5 volumes. Unfortunately, he only completed the first 2 volumes. That's about 900 pages and about 700 pages, 2 volumes. And I am very, very fortunate to have both volumes. Extraordinary survey of the Mughal period in Bengal. The most detail we have ever been written by a Muslim. And may Allah reward this man. He was so productive, exceptionally great writer and historian. But the other work I want to mention by him also is Dhaka, a Mughal capital.
Brother Muslim, I think, do we need to spend more time on the reference, or shall we move forward, you think?
I'm just going to quickly go through those. Then you've got final, okay, to cut the whole thing short, let me say to you, Amir Rahim, Social and Cultural History of Bengal. If you want to understand Mughal and Sultanate period, not from a political angle, but understand what was happening socially and culturally, Mohar Ali is not going to help you. Abdul Karim will only help you partially. These 2 volumes are very important indeed. Where can you access those sources? Libraries, British Library, Dhaka University Library, Asiatic Society of Bangladesh Library, and many, many other libraries. It's all in the slide. So I won't go through that at all and move on, since you've given me a push. Okay, in terms of by Bengal, what do I mean? Well, at the moment, from my point of view, we're talking predominantly Bangladesh and Indian state of West Bengal. As I said before, Assam, Bihar, Orissa, and all the other regions were at one time part of Bengal. Before Muslims came to this part of the world, you had the Buddhist, Palas, and the Shena dynasty, Hindu dynasty ruled this part of the world. But Muslims were moving into these parts of the world much earlier, during those periods. During the Pala and Mughal period, they were coming there. And the historical works are evident, enough evidence we've got there. So early Arab traders, Muslim missionaries were coming during this period since the early 8th century, if not earlier. In terms of the social origins of the Muslims of Bengal, I'll overlook and won't say anything at all on this. Maybe during the discussion period, we'll revisit this. So here we go. Move on. Classification of timeline. This is only personally, that's my classification, just for ease of understanding. Formative period, 1204 to 1282. Sultanate period, well, some people will say Sultanate period actually covers from 1204 to 1576. But I for ease of understanding, I've broken that down, because the first period, as you can see, from 1204 to 1208, this was a period when things were unsure. Bhaktir Khalji, his successors, and others struggled. The Balbani rulers struggled to establish themselves in Bengal. There was ups and downs, and then eventually things became a lot more clearer, and the sultans embedded themselves into the soil of Bengal, which is the period I'm talking about, the Sultanate period, 1208 to 1576. Mughal period from 1576 to 1717, and what personally I would refer to as the independent Nawabs, Murshid Kulli Khan and his successors, from 1717 to 1757, which is with the defeat of Nawab Sirajuddaulah and the victory for the East India Company. Now, if I were to break this down even further, this is what it looks like in terms of early Muslim traders and preachers came and disseminated Islam in Bengal in their own ways. But political Islam came into Bengal with Muhammad Bhaktir Khalji's emergence. Who was Bhaktir Khalji? Well, there is huge controversy over his ethnic origin, in terms of how he died, who killed him, and all sorts of other things. One thing that everybody agrees on is this man laid the foundation for Muslim rule in Bengal. After his death in 1206, he was succeeded by what I would say the successors of Khalji, in terms of two important individuals. One of them was Ghiyasuddin Iwaz Khalji, who was the most prominent of Bhaktir Khalji's descendants, and he ruled from 1213 to 1227 and consolidated after a period of chaos in Bengal. But then after him, you had a period where the Delhi Sultanate reasserted itself in Bengal again, which lasted and continued under the Balbani rulers. And among the Balbani rulers, you've got a number of very, very important sultans emerged. And now I'm mindful of time, so I'll mention just few of them. Sultan Mughisuddin Toghra, you've got Sultan Shamsuddin Feroz Shah. These were two very important rulers. So for example, Momishing and Sylhet came under Muslim rule during the time of Sultan Shamsuddin Feroz Shah. He was a very major player at that time. Look, I've got plenty of notes here. Due to time, I I'm going to skip over. So, for example, Shamsuddin Firuz Shah, he ruled for 21 years, expanded Muslim rule from his base in Shunargaon, which is approximately the area today now, a modern Narayanganj area in Dhaka. What was it? What was the Sultanate period like? As you know, I can go about the Elias Shahi rule, Raja Khan's interlude, then the Abyssinian interlude. You got the Arab dynasties of what we call Alauddin Hussein Shah and his successors, and then Nasiruddin Nusrat Shah and others, and then the Afghan rule. But these are just dates. So any history books, so whether it is Mahar Ali or somebody like Abdul Karim, you can read in detail about these periods. But I'm not interested in the chronology and the naming of these individuals. What cultural impact did this period have? I think I'm more interested in this. Now, I've got a couple of things to touch upon this period in terms of culturally. Islamization of Bengal during the Sultanate period, this is critical, because without the Sultanate period, it would have been very difficult to Islamicize, embed Islam into Bengal in the way it became embedded. So Sultanate rule is very critical to that period. So the building of mosques, madrasas, khankas, and a whole range of missionary activities by the ulama and shuyukh took place during this period. How do we know this? Well, one source that's very valuable is Shah Shuaib's Manakib al-Asfiya. In this book, he provides an many accounts of early Muslim scholars and preachers of Bengal. For example, Taqiyuddin Arabi in Mahisun. Another one, Sharafuddin Abu Tawama in Shunargaon. Both of them as two of the earliest madrasas in the history of Bengal, run by two great alims. And they trained up eminent scholars, and these people in turn went and spread throughout Bengal, preaching, promoting scholarship, learning, building more mosques and madrasas in different parts of Bengal. That included very prominent individuals like Sharafuddin Ahmad ibn Yahya al-Manari. This man was a prolific writer and was linked up with Nizamuddin Awliya and many others. But subsequently, during the later period, particularly during the Raja Khan's interlude and early Elias Shahi rule, you've got two other scholars, Alaul Haq and his son Nur Qutb Alam, played a very important role in terms of not only the conversion of Raja Khan's son, which is Sultan Jalaluddin Muhammad, to Islam, but also ensuring that he remains as much as possible and rules according to, shall I say, broad Islamic principles. So Islamization of Bengal during the Sultanate period. Patronization, the other one is patronization of Bengali and Sanskrit. The sultans played a critical role. Bengali language, a research into Bengali language and writing was, the sultans of Bengal played a critical role. Now, in case I don't have time, and you say, look, you say to me time is up and Mojlum Bhai, you'll have to cut the whole thing. I'm going to compare this with the Mughal period at the same time. Unlike the Mughals, the sultans were very generous patrons of Bengali language and literature and Sanskrit. So, for example, you've got people like Shah Muhammad Saghir, who wrote Yusuf va Zuleka, Zainuddin's Rasul Bijoy, Muzammil's Nasiyat Nama. You've got Daulat Wazir, Bahrams, Laila Majnoon, and many, many other works. These were written in Bangla. Well, you may say to me, surely it's not the same Bangla as we speak today. No, it's not. But it was written in colloquial Bangla using Arabic and Persian script. So note that point, because their Bangla was the language of the, for the peasants, if you like. The ordinary people in Bengal spoke Bangla during the Sultanate period, as they did during the Mughal period. But the language of administration was Farsi during the Mughal period, also during the Sultanate and Mughal periods. But unlike the sultans, the Mughal rulers, Mughal subadars, were not known for patronizing Bangla language and literature. Mughals were great patrons of Farsi, and I'll come to that later if I get time. Now, so Sanskrit literature, I mean, you got things like Vijaya Gupta, Vipradosh, and Kabiraj. These were prominent Sanskrit scholars and writers who were writing in Sanskrit under the patronage of sultans of Bengal. And what amazes me about the Sultanate period is how enlightened these Sultanate rulers were. They realized that scholarship, learning, research, these things were important, not just warfare and politics and infighting. No, they said learning, knowledge was very important to them. So as the ulama encouraged them and guided them, seeing the prophetic sayings, things like utlubul ilm walau kana bisin and talabul ilm faridatun ala kulli muslim, these things inspired these rulers as well. Some of them are very pious indeed, like Shamsuddin Ilyas Shah and Shamsuddin Firoz Shah, very pious individuals in their own right, and they wanted to promote learning and research. Before I move on to Mughal period, it's worth saying a little bit about the social life in Bengal during the Sultanate period. What was it like? Well, the ruler and his court, this is where most of the policy decisions were being made. But then you had the upper classes who were serving the sultans, and the sultan and his family and others would look after these people, paid them well through offer of land and also salaries. And these people in turn created another middle class of Jagirdars and all sorts of other people in different parts of Bengal who were offered small plots of land to raise tax and revenue in their areas and give it back to the local governor, who in turn would report directly back to the Sultan and his Diwan, his minister. But there was also, majority of the people were the peasants, what, for want of a better word, the Rayot. These were the peasants who went about their daily life doing the usual things that you would do, social ceremonies and things, marriage, these things in, Eid celebration, that type of things were national holidays, and they were equally, the sultans were equally happy to accommodate those as well as Hindu festivals. They're very pluralistic from that point of view. Final point is on the economy of during the Sultanate period. Agriculture was the key, the mainstay of the economy in Sultanate Bengal. So things like rice, jute, vegetables, fish, but you had some textile, sugar, and shipbuilding was a very important industry in Sultanate Bengal. So for example, the Nawara, the navy, which enabled the Mughals to actually take, the Mughal navy allowed the Mughals to take Bengal from the sultans. Bengal had a very well established shipbuilding industry, but it was very wealthy as well. If you read eyewitness accounts, and I'll mention one, Ibn Battuta, he goes around the villages of Bengal, and in his Rihla, what does he say? He says fruits, vegetables, rice are So there are so much of it. Ibn Battuta says he actually, they were so cheap because of the abundance. They were so cheap, dirt cheap, he says. Everywhere he went, there was just absolutely abundance. They were poverty. These people didn't know what poverty was. According to Ibn Battuta, he visited Sylhet. According to others, he visited Hooghly area. There is a disagreement whether he landed, whether he went to Sylhet via Hooghly or he went to Sylhet via Chittagong. But that's another separate discussion. But Ibn Battuta and others have provided eyewitness account of how prosperous Bengal was during the Sultanate period, and this is fact. This is a fact. It's not something that I or anybody else has made up. It's there in the history books and records. Now, on the Sultanate period, how am I doing time-wise? Do you want me to move to Mughal period, or do you want me to say a couple of words on the Sultanate administration?
Please do carry on as the own pace. It's going good.
Okay. So on the Sultanate administration, because you see, you can sit down here and you can get Mohar Ali's book, or I can give you many other books, and I've got piles of them. Chronology of history is there, but without the social history, without the cultural history, all of these things don't make sense. And that's where Mohar Ali's weakness is. He provides a political history here. His third volume is on culture, but it is so slim. I wish he had developed that more. Rahimahullah, may Allah bless him for his efforts. But we need people like Abdul Karim did a lot more work on the social and cultural side, and Professor Muhammad Abdul Rahim, he did a lot more work, but we do not have an accessible book in English on the culture of the Muslims of Bengal, covering both the Sultanate and Mughal period. This is a major gap, and we need to do something about it as a people. So if we have any philanthropists amongst us who want this type of work done, we might be able to fill this gap in the future. The sources that we've got the ability to do this going forward. We need the funding to move forward. Now, so what was the administration during the Sultanate like? Well, this was an absolute monarchy, basically. Politically speaking, it was an absolute monarchy. Basically, the Sultan had the final say on most of the things. In this day, we will call it a dictatorship. But the good thing is, these sultans, majority of them were very benign, very wise in most cases, and very tolerant, unlike a lot of the dictators these days. In terms of how did they go about doing things? Well, look, their administration revolved around this structure, where you had the senior court officers, the ones, if you like, the head of the armed forces. You had the enforcers of the law and order. You had the senior khatibs and imams, but you had also the tax collectors, the revenue collectors. The major decisions were made by the senior members of the family, who operated as a naib wazirs, if you like, deputy rulers or deputy governors of different parts of Bengal. So the Sultan would say, okay, say if he had 3 sons, he would say, okay, you are in charge of a Shunargaon area, you are in charge of the Sylhet area, you are in charge of that area. They reported directly to the Sultan. In terms of the way they operated, they were very pluralistic. Here you've got absolute monarchies being ruled by a very powerful Sultan, but very pluralistic in terms of his shall I say, a local administration as opposed to central administration. So at a local level, the sultans were very pluralistic. So what did they do? They had Hindus and Muslims as local officials in charge of certain areas. This took the form of, and this was developed subsequently during the Mughal period, but generally speaking, this took the forms of subadars. It took the form of faujdars, qazis, jagirdars. So, for example, the subadars were the governors of a particular area. Faujdar was in charge of a particular sarkar, because the Mughal Sultanate administration was broken down into different segments. Like in this country, we have got central government. And then what happens is that itself, it devolves into local areas. So we have got, for example, county councils. Then we've got borough councils or parish councils. During the Sultanate and Mughal period, we had subas, sarkars, parganas, chakla, even down to the mahal. And I'll come to those when I cover the Mughal period. The Mughals were very brilliant at making this even more complex. Now, the other point I want to make here is that the sultans, unlike the Mughals, at least nominally, they pledged allegiance either to the Delhi Sultan, whether it was the Mamluks or those or if you like the successors of Ghurids, they would do that just simply to avoid the Sultan from Delhi attacking them. Or for a religious perspective, to please the ulama and keep everybody happy, there were sultans in Bengal who pledged allegiance to the Khalif in Baghdad, the Abbasid Khalifs in Baghdad, nominally. And that provided a religious justification for their rule. And the Khalifs from Baghdad were only happy to recognize them as the Shahi Bangla, the king of Bangla or Sultan of Bangla. So this is a very brief overview of the cultural and culture and the administration during the Sultanate period. There wasn't a huge difference in their in the format of government. It was a continuation in many ways of what was happening in Delhi, and before that, the Seljuks, the Abbasids, and before them, the Umayyads. There were a lot of similarity in terms of their makeup of government and how they operated. Right. Can I move on to the Mughal period now?
Yeah, could you round it up in next 15 minutes, please?
Okay.
If possible.
Okay, that's fine. What we'll do then is, in the Mughals have been trying to secure Bengal even from the time of Babar and Humayun. Humayun had been in Bengal. He loved the place. As I said earlier, he called it Jannatabad. His descendants also loved. The Mughals had a soft spot for Bengal, full stop. In terms of sources for the study of Bengal, you've got Akbar Nama and Aini Akbari of Abul Fazl, worth consulting. You've got Tabakate Akbari of Nizamuddin, is very good. These are imperial histories providing general overview of a Mughal administration as a whole, Mughal empire as a whole, but touching upon Bengal. But there's two sources I want to mention quickly here. Baharistan Ghaibi of Mirza Nathan, very important, which covers Bengal in detail because he had served in Bengal during the time of a Shah Jahan. And this is a very, very important work. The other one is Subeh Sadiq or Muhammad Ishaq, who had served during the time of Shah Jahan in Bengal and had a Jagir, held a plot of land in Bihar also for a period. And he wrote a universal history, 4 volumes, again covers up to the 7th year of Shah Jahan's rule. Very interesting sources, in addition to the ones I've mentioned before, like Abdul Karim's 2 volumes on Mughal history and others. It was during the reign of Akbar that Mughals finally took Bengal in 1576. After Akbar, particularly during the time of Jahangir and Shah Jahan, this was consolidated. During his successor's time, certainly the early period of Aurangzeb's reign was very strong, but towards the latter part of his reign, things became a lot weaker. And Mughals started losing their hold on Bengal for all kinds of reasons. This is where Naib Nazim in Murshid Kulli Khan effectively became the independent Nawab of Bengal in 1717, and his successors carried on. In terms of his successors, who do I mean? I'm talking about people like Ali Vardi Khan or Allah Vardi Khan, and his grandson was the last, if you like, last Muslim ruler of Bengal. Sirajud-Dawla was his grandson through one of his youngest daughters. Now, what was a Mughal administration like? Because I think I want to, over the next 10 minutes or so, touch upon this before we wrap things up and go for a discussion. In terms of Mughal administration, as I said earlier, imitated Sultanate rule very much. Why reinvent the wheel if it works? But what they did was they actually made it more detailed and expanded it further. How did they do that? One of the key principles was Persian language. Under the Mughals, Persian language received a generous patronage. In fact, it was Akbar who actually officially announced in 1582 that Farsi would be the language of administration in the Mughal dynasty. And he specifically ordered Todarmal, his Dewan, his minister, to ensure all Mughal records, all Mughal official paperwork were conducted, communication were conducted in Farsi. So which forced not only Muslims, but also Hindu, middle ranking and senior officials to learn Farsi. And this is the beginning of the Persianization, if you like, of the Muslim culture of Bengal. That not only among Muslims, but also among the Hindus. This is where the Hindu elites now dressing like Muslims, wearing turbans and speaking Farsi and writing. So much so that Raja Ram Mohan Roy, he subsequently in the late part of 18th and early 19th century, he edits a Persian journal and writes his Tufat al-Muahidun in Persian, which is a gift to the monotheists. So Persian went all over Bengal, from Sylhet to Rangpur to Rajshahi to Chittagong, widely promoted. And the other thing I want to mention here is, during the Mughal period, less emphasis on Bengali language, but Mughals were culturally and racially very eclectic. What do I mean by that? They were they were of Mongol, Tumerian, Amir Taimurs, Rajput, Afghan. They shared all of these ancestries. Jahangir, his mother was Rajput. Jahangir's 7 of his 17 wives was Rajput. So Shah Jahan's mother was Rajput, Hindu. So they were. The other point I want to make during the Mughal period is more Shia Muslims moved to Bengal during Mughal period than they did during the Sultanate period. Particularly Murshid Quli Khan, who was himself Shia, he was responsible during the 18th century for the huge influx of Shias from Persia into Bengal. Because when Nadir Shah was creating chaos, the Persians heard that in Bengal there was a Shia ruler in Murshid Quli Khan, and he was very wise and enlightened, and so they all moved. So you had people like Mir Ashraf Ali family in Dhaka, and many other eminent Persian Shia families established themselves in Bengal. But Hindus also at that time, very powerful players in the Mughal dynasty, very prominent senior officers, army officers, Dewans, and tax collectors, and so on. Murshid Quli Khan put them in very high positions. But another important point to make here is the emphasis on Islam as a faith, a religion, during the Mughal period took an eclectic turn. What do I mean by that? The Mughals, by and large, paid lip service to Islam as a faith. So Akbar established his what you call a dawat khana, where he would, or more accurately, ibadat khana. His ibadat khana is where he would invite Christians, Hindus, Muslims, and engage in all kinds of philosophical and cultural and religious and theological discussions. And this is where the origin of Din-e-Ilahi concept came about. But to be fair to him, Aurangzeb moved away from that to a large extent. Whereas Jahangir and Shah Jahan were slowly moved away. With Aurangzeb, the turn was a lot more tighter. He moved more towards Islamic orthodoxy, patronized Muslim scholars. He is widely known in the history books as a Zinda Pir, the living saint, a man who used to sleep on the floor and used to walk to the dargahs and so on of prominent ulama to pray and so on. He was slightly different from the rest of his family members. Now, I guess time-wise, I'm very close to what you allocated me, right? 3-4 minutes. Well, so what can I say in terms of summing up? Look, lessons from history. Why study history? Well, if history is all about studying for the sake of past, for the sake of studying the past, is a waste of time, as far as I'm concerned. Because as the Quran, quarter of the Quran is history. And the Quran says history is there for lessons to be learned from it. Which is why Ibn Khaldun, being a very great historian, look at the title of his book, Kitab al-Ibar, wa Diwan al-Mubtada, wal Ayyam al-Arab wal Barbar. The introduction to this book is called Al-Muqaddimah. And what does this say? Kitab al-Ibar, a book of instructions, instructive lessons. And frankly, if we don't learn lessons from history, it's an exercise in futility. That's how Muslims traditionally approach history. So history of Bengal is characterized by political instability with periods of enlightenment and a great progress. Economically, there was flux and ups and downs. As far as the masses were concerned, they carried on life as it was. But in terms of traders were happy to link up with all people of all different backgrounds and made a lot of progress economically. Religious and cultural indifference. What do I mean by that? Look, let's be frank here. Despite the sultan's effort to patronize learning and so on, none of these rulers, sultans or Mughals, went out of their way to promote Islam and encourage conversion. If they did, look, most of the subcontinent today would not be Hindu. It would be Muslims. These guys were very pluralistic. They didn't force anybody. In fact, the Mughals went out of their way not to convert anybody because of tax and other reasons and revenue reasons. Learning from the past. If we do not know the past, we will never learn lessons from the past. And that is probably one of the biggest and most powerful lessons that today the Bangladeshis and the Muslims of Bengal has to learn. That how can you learn from the past and not continue to repeat it if we do not know the past? Unfortunately, history, the way history is taught in Bangladeshi universities today, it's very disappointing indeed. So that what does that require? Maybe we need to do what was done in Arakan, Bangla Sahityer Moddho Juge, which is we need to invest in our new generation in the Western world of Bengali origin. We need to find funds to do so, establish more research institute and invest in this research, and we could have another, if you like, another revival from the West, if you like, on this subject to inspire the present generation for the future, because knowledge is power, as they say. So having spoken non-stop for, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour, what do we observe here? This is a very rich history. Volumes and volumes can be written, and there is so much to learn, but unfortunately, history is a subject that is neglected, history of Bengal. I approach this subject as a personal quest for meaning, but really we need to move beyond this, and we need to professionalize. That requires less mosques. I'm sorry to say this, less mosques, madrasas, and more money into research institutes. Because, you know, today's mosques could be tomorrow, you know, I hope it doesn't happen, I pray to Allah Ta'ala, but tomorrow's something else. These buildings we are turning into mosques today, investing millions of pounds, used to be before what? There used to be clubs, pubs, and synagogues. These buildings can change purpose anytime. We need to capture the mind and intellect, and our community is sleepwalking into intellectual disaster. This is a great legacy for future generations if we can make it available to them. I'm humbled by the response to the Muslim heritage of Bengal. Really, but it's a work of a student, and I am a student, always will be. But I have it is the British history after the Mughal period. That's the area I'm writing my books in, and that is for another day. It's an extraordinarily fascinating period, and again, the Muslims of Bengal played a critical role during this period. But both India-centric historians, Pakistan historians do not give enough credit to the Muslims of Bengal. And I am trying in my humble way to fill this gap with this biography on Nawab Abdul Latif, covering the 19th century, saying this man was one of the greatest Muslim reformers of the 19th century, along with Jamaluddin Afghani, along with Muhammad Abduhu, Ismail Beg Gaspar Ali, and Sayyid Ahmed Khan Bahadur. And the fifth one was Nawab Abdul Latif. These five greatest Muslim reformers of the 19th century. We haven't got a biography of Abdul Latif up to today, but I'm hoping very shortly we will have a very comprehensive biography of anything from 600 to 800 pages, inshallah. That with that I conclude this very short and I would say conversation with you rather than a presentation. Thank you very much for patiently listening.
Thank you so much. I think you have given us quite a very well-rounded picture of those 500 period. So again, we thank Brother Mojlum Khan for taking time in preparing the PowerPoint presentation and delivering the lecture. We also thank all of our audience for being patient in listening to the lecture and taking part in the discussion. We look forward to have your participation in the coming lectures as well. So with that, we are concluding our lecture today. Bye for now.